Welcome to Washington Today on C-SPAN Radio for Friday, May 24, 2024. The International Court of Justice issues an order calling on Israel to immediately halt its military operation in Rafah in Gaza. Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin tells graduates at the U.S. Naval Academy that they will soon be leading service members through tension and uncertainty, pointing out that 2 of last year's graduates served on a Navy destroyer in the Red Sea recently, shooting down missiles and drones fired by Iran-backed militias. President of Kenya, William Ruto, continues his state visit to the United States, attending a U.S. Chamber of Commerce program and a State Department luncheon with Vice President Kamala Harris and Secretary of State Antony Blinken. Independent U.S. presidential candidate Robert F. Kennedy Jr. speaks to the Libertarian Party National Convention in Washington, D.C., talking about the importance of the Bill of Rights. And British Prime Minister Rishi Sunak announces a general election on July 4th. We'll talk with C-SPAN's producer in London, Peter Knowles, about whether the Prime Minister's Conservative Party can hold on to power or if the main opposition Labour Party will get a majority of seats in Parliament, and what issues will drive the election campaign. Story from Reuters: Israeli ministers dismissed Friday's ruling by the International Court of Justice ordering Israel to cease its military operation in the southern Gaza city of Rafah, vowing to continue fighting to free its hostages and defeat Hamas. Friday's ruling by the World Court was the latest in a series of steps in recent weeks that have deepened Israel's international isolation over its conduct of the war in Gaza, which has killed more than 35,000 Palestinians, according to local health authorities. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's office rejected the allegations in the case brought by South Africa that Israel was carrying out genocide in Gaza as, quote, false, outrageous, and morally repugnant. It said in a statement, Israel is acting based on its right to defend its territory and its citizens, consistent with its moral values and in compliance with international law. The International Court of Justice President Nawaf Salam said in announcing the ruling that it was necessary because the humanitarian situation in Rafah had gotten worse.
In the present order, the court notes that the catastrophic humanitarian situation in the Gaza Strip, which, as stated in its order of January 26, 2024, was at serious risk of deteriorating, has deteriorated, and has done so even further since the court adopted its order of March 28, 2024. In this regard, the court observes that the concern that it expressed in its decision communicated to the parties on February 16, 2024, with respect to the developments in Rafah have materialized, and that the humanitarian situation is now to be characterized as disastrous. After weeks of intensification of military bombardments of Rafah, where more than 1 million Palestinians had fled as a result of Israeli evacuation orders, covering more than 3/4 of Gaza's entire territory, on May 6, 2024, nearly 100,000 Palestinians were ordered by Israel to evacuate the eastern portion of Rafah and relocate to Al-Mawasi and Khan Yunis areas ahead of a planned military offensive. The military ground offensive in Rafah, which Israel started on May 7, 2024, is still ongoing and has led to new evacuation orders. As a result, according to United Nations reports, nearly 800,000 people have been displaced from Rafah as at May 18, 2024. The court considered that the aforementioned developments, which are exceptionally grave, in particular the military offensive in Rafah, and the resulting repeated large-scale displacement of already extremely vulnerable Palestinian population in the Gaza Strip, constitute a change in the situation within the meaning of Article 76 of the Rules of Court.
The International Court of Justice President Nawaf Salam at the court headquarters in The Hague, Netherlands, part of a half-hour explanation of today's ruling, which included this conclusion.
The court considered that, in conformity with its obligations under the Genocide Convention, Israel must immediately halt its military offensive, and any other action in the Rafah governorate which may inflict on the Palestinian group in Gaza conditions of life that could bring about its physical destruction in whole or in part.
Story from BBC. Minutes after the decision of the International Court of Justice, warplanes launched a series of airstrikes on the Shabura camp in the center of the city of Rafah. Local activists at nearby Kuwait Hospital told the BBC that the sounds of bombing were terrifying and clouds of black smoke hung over buildings in the camp. An Israeli government spokesperson, Avi Hyman, posted a video on X this morning right before the ruling came out, and he included part of an interview he did this week in anticipation of that ruling.
If the International Court of Justice rules against Israel's operation in Rafah this Friday, will Israel suspend the operation?
No power on earth will stop Israel from protecting its citizens and going after Hamas in Gaza. We will destroy Hamas. We will return peace and security to the people of Israel and to the people of Gaza. We cannot go on with a genocidal terrorist regime on our southern border. We will destroy Hamas.
Israeli government spokesperson Avi Hyman posting that video of himself on X. From Reuters, Internal Security Minister Itamar Ben-Gvir, who heads a hardline nationalist religious party that is key to the stability of Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's coalition, dismissed the ruling, saying our future doesn't depend on what the Gentiles say, but rather what the Jews do, quoting a celebrated remark by David Ben-Gurion, Israel's first prime minister. And some reaction to the International Court of Justice ruling from members of the U.S. Congress. Congresswoman Rashida Tlaib, Democrat from Michigan, posting on X, the whole world is taking action to stop the genocide of Palestinians, including the International Court of Justice. Where is President Biden's red line? And from Senator Lindsey Graham, Republican of South Carolina, he writes, as far as I'm concerned, the ICJ can go to hell. It is long past time to stand up to these so-called international justice organizations associated with the UN. Their anti-Israel bias is overwhelming. The ICJ's ruling that Israel should stop operations that are necessary to destroy 4 battalions of Hamas killers and terrorists who use Palestinians as human shields is ridiculous. This will and should be ignored by Israel. That was from Senator Lindsey Graham. From the Washington Post, Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin told U.S. Naval Academy graduates Friday that they will be leading future sailors and Marines through tension and uncertainty, noting how 2 graduates from last year were just aboard the USS Carney in the Red Sea, where they helped shoot down missiles and drones. The Navy has stationed multiple ships in the Red Sea since the start of the Israel-Hamas war on October 7th, which has heightened tensions in the region. That was from the Washington Post. Here is Secretary Austin.
And so today, from the South China Sea to the Red Sea, we're seeing new challenges to the open world of rules, rights, and responsibilities built with American leadership after World War II. And in times like these, freedom of navigation rides on the bowways of U.S. Navy ships. As officers, you will help us increase American security and model American values worldwide. Our sailors and Marines let the U.S. military project power anywhere on Earth. And so we're depending on you to secure the world's sea lanes for the free flow of ships, commerce, and ideas. We're depending on you to sail, fly, and operate wherever international law allows. We're depending on you to deepen old alliances and forge new friendships. And we're depending on you to deter conflict and to keep the peace. As Admiral Arleigh Burke said back in 1961, U.S. Navy officers must understand not only how to fight a war, but how to use the tremendous power which they operate to sustain a world of liberty and justice. That's your mission, and you will be tested. Just ask last year's graduates. Now, two members of the class of 2023 have asked me to pass along a message today. Those ensigns were aboard the USS Carney, and they helped defend freedom of navigation in the Red Sea. They helped those in distress at sea. They helped degrade the capabilities of the Iranian-backed Houthi militia, and they helped shoot down missiles and UAVs. In fact, the Carney conducted 51 engagements in 6 months, which is the most direct Navy engagements with a foe since World War II. And the message of those ensigns on the Carney to the class of 2024 is this: you are ready. Believe it. You are ready because, as one of those ensigns put it, the Academy is the ultimate team-building exercise, and what comes next is not a drill. You will lead sailors and Marines through tension and uncertainty. Your teammates will look to you for leadership, for grace under pressure, for calm under fire, and you will be ready.
Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin speaking to the U.S. Naval Academy graduation ceremony in Annapolis, Maryland today. President Biden will be addressing the graduates of the U.S. Military Academy at West Point on Saturday, 10 a.m. Eastern. We'll have live coverage on C-SPAN television and on the free C-SPAN Now mobile app. The Pentagon Press Secretary, Major General Pat Ryder, put out a statement today about Defense Secretary Austin, saying that he will undergo a scheduled, elective, and minimally invasive follow-up non-surgical procedure related to his previously reported bladder issue at Walter Reed National Military Medical Center later this evening. The Secretary, the statement says, has determined he will be temporarily unable to perform his functions and duties during the procedure. So Deputy Secretary of Defense Kathleen Hicks will assume the functions and duties of the Secretary of Defense and serve as the Acting Secretary of Defense. As highlighted in the February 13th DoD news release, the statement says the Secretary's bladder issue is not related to his cancer diagnosis and has had no effect on his excellent cancer prognosis. White House and congressional notifications have occurred, and they say we will provide an update on Secretary Austin's status following his medical procedure. From Fox News, Vice President Kamala Harris is announcing the formation of a new partnership to help provide internet access to 80% of Africa by 2030, up from roughly 40% now. Friday's announcement comes as follow-through on Harris's visit to the continent last year in conjunction with this week's visit to Washington by Kenyan President William Ruto. The two leaders had a fireside chat today at the U.S. Chamber of Commerce about how public-private partnerships can increase economic growth. And then they went to the State Department, where the Vice President and Secretary of State Antony and Blinken were hosting a luncheon for the Kenyan president. Vice President Harris spoke about development in Kenya and U.S. relations with that country and the continent of Africa.
No country on the continent more embodies this spirit of innovation than Kenya. Kenya, as many here know, has Silicon Savannah, a $1 billion technology ecosystem confronting challenges that range from the climate crisis to financial inclusion to healthcare. To address wealth inequity, innovators at M-Pesa help low-income people pay and repay microloans, and they have revolutionized the mobile payments industry. To help solve the problem and challenge of pollution coming from plastics, and to address threats to marine ecosystems, a Kenyan startup now converts aquatic invasive plants into biodegradable plastic. To tackle water security, and in particular scarcity and drought, a Kenyan startup now turns humidity from the air into clean drinking water. To help his deaf niece communicate, a Kenyan data scientist invented a smart glove to convert sign language into audible speech through a mobile app. And to make healthcare more accessible and affordable, AI is now being used for medical image scans, and chatbots are providing healthcare advice. President Ruto, innovation has flourished under your leadership. You and I just left a fireside chat at the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. Your leadership has been extraordinary. And as I shared with you, with our Ambassador Whitman, you really, as a leader, symbolize the importance of the partnership between the United States and the continent. You ran, Mr. President, on a platform of promoting entrepreneurship and strengthening your economy. You have spoken powerfully about the need to bridge the digital divide and that innovation will drive economic growth. Your work and this visit reinforces the point that African ideas and African innovation will help shape the future of the world.
Vice President Kamala Harris at the State Department at a luncheon for the Kenyan President William Ruto, part of his state visit to the U.S. this week.
Africa is a continent of tremendous opportunity. The largest reserves of energy, renewable energy resources. 60% of the world's arable and cultivated land. 30% of mineral wealth, global mineral wealth, including those that are necessary for energy transition. The youngest continent, which will produce 40% of the world's working workforce by 2050, and where a quarter of the world's population will be living, providing the world's biggest single market. In short, Africa is a rich continent and a continent of opportunity. I am very happy that President Biden and this visit is giving us the opportunity to rewrite and recalibrate the relationship between this great superpower and our continent. And I am very proud that among the things we've agreed are not just about Kenya and the US, it's about Kenya and the continent of Africa. From what we are doing around climate action, what we are doing around the financial architecture of the world, to make it fairer, to make it much more sensitive, to make it much more agile, and to make it possible for many African countries and those in the global south, many developing countries, to access concessionary resources for us to manage the affairs of our people, and that no country will spend more money on paying debt or on managing climate-induced crisis than they do on spending on health, education, or social service.
President of Kenya, William Ruto, at the State Department today, a luncheon in his honor attended by the Vice President Kamala Harris and Secretary of State Antony Blinken, part of his official visit to Washington. Story from USA Today, many prominent U.S. lawmakers are upset over House Speaker Mike Johnson's rejection of a joint meeting of Congress with William Ruto, which was proposed by the House Committee on Foreign Affairs to, quote, underscore the importance of the U.S.-Kenya relationship. His office cited scheduling issues for the denial. Ruto's trip is the first state visit by a Kenyan president to the United States in 2 decades and the first by an African leader since 2008. The last African leader to address Congress was Libertarian President Ellen Johnson Sirleaf, who spoke to the House chamber in 2006. In a letter to Speaker Johnson, Congressman Stephen Horsford, chair of the Congressional Black Caucus, called the move an affront to American diplomacy, adding that it was especially troubling given that other heads of state who have come to the U.S. for an official visit during the 118th Congress have been invited to address Congress. That was from USA Today. Washington Today continues in a moment.
Hi, it's Kayla from C-SPAN. Imagine 45 years ago when there was just a handful of television networks. C-SPAN first went on the air bringing an unfiltered view of government directly to America's living rooms. No spin, no commentary, just pure democracy in action.
And it's Greta from C-SPAN. It was a bold experiment. We finally had a front row seat to Congress, the White House, and the campaign trail, all without government funding.
As we celebrate 45 years and a legacy of unfiltered access, we ask for your support of a donation in honor of our 4 decades of service. Your gift, no matter how big or small, will help maintain this vital resource for access to the democratic process.
You can help ensure another 45 years of witnessing history unfold and empowering citizens to be informed and engaged in the political process. Visit cspan.org/donate today and join our 45th anniversary campaign.
Thank you for supporting C-SPAN, your unfiltered view of government. Visit cspan.org/donate today to make your gift of support. Thank you.
Welcome back to Washington Today, available as a podcast on the C-SPAN Now mobile app, and that's free, and also wherever you find your podcasts. Libertarians, writes Scripps News, believe in small government, limiting its influence in Americans' daily lives and cutting or eliminating taxes at every opportunity. At this year's National Convention, party leaders say they want to challenge the status quo, and they're welcoming speakers from other political parties. Former President Donald Trump and independent presidential candidate Robert F. Kennedy Jr. are both scheduled to speak at the convention, but not all libertarians are happy to see the leader of the Republican Party headlining their convention. Angela McArdle, the chair of the Libertarian National Committee, defended the decision and said it's about bringing more attention to the Libertarian Party. She also said it's part of the party's attempt to get on the presidential debate stage. President Joe Biden was also invited to speak at the convention, but McArdle says his team didn't respond. That was from Scripps News. Donald Trump is scheduled to speak at the convention in Washington, D.C. on Saturday. Robert F. Kennedy Jr. spoke today.
If you treasure your freedom, you better elect leaders who are inspired by it and who will wield it to inspire others. Leaders who believe in freedoms and hold the Bill of Rights in reverence. I'm sorry to say that neither President Trump nor President Biden passed this critical examination. Neither of them upheld the Constitution when it really counted. Let's start with President Trump. I think he had the right instinct when he came into office. He was initially very reluctant to impose lockdowns, but then he got rolled by his bureaucrats. He caved in, and many of our most fundamental rights disappeared practically overnight. It all started with the social media, and the mainstream media, apparently without any government prompting, began censoring any speech that departed from the government's official orthodoxies. It's critical to the survival of any democracy that the free press maintains a posture of fierce skepticism toward government pronouncements and towards large agglomerations of government and political and economic and corporate power. But suddenly, America's free press was no longer speaking truth to power. Instead, it made itself a vessel for government propaganda. It began suppressing the voices of dissent and silencing and gaslighting the powerless. Oh, Hamilton, Madison, and Adams said that they had put the First Amendment or put the right of free expression into the First Amendment because all of the other rights depended on it. A government that has the capacity to silence its critics has license for any kind of atrocity.
Independent presidential candidate Robert F. Kennedy Jr. speaking to the Libertarian National Convention in Washington, D.C. today. Republican presidential candidate and likely party nominee Donald Trump will speak to the Libertarian Convention on Saturday, 8 p.m. Eastern. We'll have live coverage on C-SPAN. You can listen or watch anywhere on the free C-SPAN Now mobile app. And the convention finishes up on Sunday when the party will choose a nominee. Back to the Scripps News article. They write, whoever does win the Libertarian nomination Sunday afternoon is still a long shot in the election. The 2016 candidate Gary Johnson pulled in 3% of the national vote, and 2020 nominee Joe Jurgensen got only 1%. However, a third-party candidate could pull votes away from Trump and President Biden, and that can certainly impact who wins the White House in November. That was the writing from Scripps News. Republican Donald Trump is talking about expanding the presidential electoral map to include states that Republicans are not necessarily expected to win. He held a campaign rally Thursday night in the Bronx, New York. While there, he was interviewed by Fox & Friends co-host Lawrence Jones, and some of that interview aired on this morning's Fox & Friends program.
Mr. President, you're pulling something off there. I've been begging Republicans, come to the black community, come to the Hispanic community. More people that were here today look more like me than you. Why did you come here today?
Well, because I've done very well with the vote. I love the people. They're incredible. They're energetic. They're entrepreneurial, and they're going to save New York. And we're going to win New York. And if we win New York, the election's over. We take over the country. We take over the country.
You think you're going to win?
I think we have a chance to win New York. It hasn't been done in many, many decades. As a Republican, I think we have a very good chance. When you see the crowd, nobody's ever seen.
Why do they like you better than any other Republican in modern time?
Well, you have to ask the other Republicans.
I mean, I'm just saying, you see black support going up with you, Hispanic, young people. Like I said, the people look more like me than you, and they say you're different. Why?
Because I did things in office that nobody else has done. Criminal justice reform. I did criminal justice reform at a level that nobody thought was possible to get. And I did that largely for the black and Hispanic community. They're the ones that wanted it. Opportunity zones with Tim Scott. And he was so much in favor of it. And it's probably maybe the best economic development package ever for African Americans, for Hispanic Americans, Asian Americans. We did a lot of things that people couldn't believe we were able to get done.
Republican presidential candidate Donald Trump on Fox News Channel interviewed at the site of his Thursday night rally in the Bronx, New York. The district of Congressman Richie Torres, Democrat from New York, is in the Bronx, and he was interviewed today by WPIX-TV about Donald Trump's rally.
Mr. Trump, was settling in on the Bronx. He was really trying to lure black and Latino votes. What do you make of the fact that he went to the Bronx to do that?
Look, Donald Trump is a narcissist with delusions of grandeur, and he's the only Republican delusional enough to think that he can be remotely competitive in the Bronx. Keep in mind that Donald Trump once said that he was the best president for African Americans, even surpassing Abraham Lincoln. And so anyone who ranks himself above Abraham Lincoln is too delusional to be in the White House. If you examine objective polling data among likely voters in the Bronx, you will find that Donald Trump is less popular than even the Boston Red Sox.
I mean, were you surprised at all, though, by the number of folks that showed up yesterday? I mean, he played to that audience a little bit. He secured the support of a pair of rappers that were up on stage. I mean, full disclosure, though, they were reportedly indicted on gang-related charges in the past. But what did you think about that? And do you think that'll, attract some of the undecided voters out there in the Bronx?
Look, it seems to me the rally was a mix of transplants and locals, but it was unrepresentative of the Bronx. And keep in mind that if Donald Trump had no criminal trial in New York City, he never would have been caught dead campaigning in the Bronx. He's a criminal suspect with more than 91 felony counts. The only reason he's running for president is to pardon himself, to protect himself from criminal prosecution. So we should keep in mind that the highest priority of Donald Trump is not the people of the Bronx, it's himself. It always has been and always will be.
Congressman Richie Torres, Democrat from New York, interviewed on WPIX-TV in in New York. An article in Forbes reads, President Joe Biden has lost a significant share of support in the Democratic stronghold of New York, according to a new survey that shows him beating former President Donald Trump there by just 9 points. A warning sign as the president struggles in crucial swing states, and a surprise result that comes as Trump hosts a rally in the deep blue Bronx. Biden leads Trump 47% to 38% in New York after beating him there by 23 points in 2020, according to a May 13th through 15th Siena College poll. British Prime Minister Rishi Sunak, leader of the ruling Conservative Party, announced this week that there will be a general election on July 4th. A general election is required in Great Britain at least every 5 years, which in this case would have come up in early 2025. So he called it earlier than needed, a snap election, as it's known. The Prime Minister made the announcement on Wednesday outside 10 Downing Street, the Prime Minister's residence in London. In the background, you'll hear a song being played loudly by a protester.
Economic stability is the bedrock of any future success, whether that is rising wages and good jobs, investment in our public services, or the defence of the country. And because of our collective sacrifice and your hard work, we have reached 2 major milestones in delivering that stability, showing that when we work together, anything is possible. Our economy is now growing faster than anyone predicted, outpacing Germany, France, and the United States. And this morning it was confirmed that inflation is back to normal. This means that the pressure on prices will ease and mortgage rates will come down. This is proof that the plan and priorities I set out are working. I recognise that it has not always been easy. Some of you will only just be starting to feel the benefits, and for some, it might still be hard when you look at your bank balance. But this hard-earned economic stability was only ever meant to be the beginning. The question now is how and who do you trust to turn that foundation into a secure future for you, your family, and our country. Now is the moment for Britain to choose its future, to decide whether we want to build on the progress we have made or risk going back to square one with no plan and no certainty. Earlier today, I spoke with His Majesty the King to request the dissolution of Parliament. The King has granted this request, and we will have a general election on the 4th of July.
British Prime Minister Rishi Sunak in London on Wednesday. The music in the background is being played by a protester. The main opposition party currently in the British Parliament is Labour, and its leader, Keir Starmer, responded on Wednesday to the call for a general election.
Tonight, the Prime Minister has finally announced the next general election, a moment the country needs and has been waiting for, and where, by the force of our democracy, power returns to you. A chance to change for the better your future, your community, your country. Now, it will feel like a long campaign, I'm sure of that. But no matter what else is said and done, that opportunity for change is what this election is about. Over the course of the last 4 years, we've changed the Labour Party, returned it once more to the service of working people. All we ask now, humbly, is to do exactly the same for our country and return Britain to the service of working people.
British Labour Party leader Keir Starmer on Wednesday. Joining us now from London to talk more about the upcoming British election is Peter Knowles, C-SPAN's producer in Great Britain. Thanks, as always, for being with us. So, Prime Minister Sunak scheduled the election a little bit earlier than he had to. Why now?
Well, why now is such a good question. It's what all his own side are asking of him, and they're fairly astonished. This election's coming several months earlier than it needed to, and it comes at a time when the Conservatives are hugely behind in the opinion polls. I mean, about 20 points behind. It varies from poll to poll, but around that, which would point to a change in government and a Labour government with a majority. So why now? Well, the immediate reason was that the Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak, got some good economic news. There'd been some growth after a period without any, and much lower inflation. So he took that to be the trigger to go to the country and ask for another mandate. And it's assumed by most people, by his own side included, that this is because he didn't see any more good news coming over the summer. There might well be trouble. A very troublesome party at the moment, and always threats of leadership challenges, but also doubts whether the new policies being brought in to try and curb illegal migration, doubts whether they were going to be immediately effective, and perhaps other troubles ahead. So the Prime Minister is in charge of the timetable. They have extraordinary powers in this regard, and he simply went to the palace and asked the King for a dissolution of Parliament. The King is obliged by convention to say yes, and that's what he got, and he astonished his own party. This was a very closely kept secret amongst a very small number of people. It had not leaked out. So I was in the press gallery on the Wednesday morning when rumours were starting to fly around and people couldn't quite believe it. Actually, the conventional wisdom had become this election would take place in October, November. But here we are. We're at the start of what's regarded here as a long campaign. You're allowed to smile at this point because it's 6 weeks long. It could have been 5 weeks, but he's made it a long campaign. So we've got 6 weeks of this ahead of us. With an election on the 4th of July, and the 4th of July doesn't ring any bells around here. So nobody, that was a perfectly normal day to hold it, Thursday the 4th of July.
What issues do you expect will define the campaign?
The issues that the Prime Minister and the Leader of the Opposition have chosen, the two words that they've chosen is security. That's from the Prime Minister saying, if you want defence security in a threatening world and economic security in an unstable world, stick with us. And change is the single word that Keir Starmer, Leader of the Labour Opposition, presented as the alternative, that we need to. We're fed it with this. You've had enough from these people. Let's change. Beyond that very simple dichotomy, security versus change, if you look at the main promises, the outline promises of the two parties, and of course we haven't had the detailed manifestos yet, there's an awful lot in common. I mean, these parties seem in some ways a bit closer together than is the case in many European countries, and a lot closer together than they were 5 years ago when you had a left-winger, Jeremy Corbyn, against a populist, Boris Johnson. So you see overlap. They both promised to get the National Health Service back into a decent state, because it's right now in a very fragile state, and to improve the economy. And they're both promising to do things to curb illegal migration, promising to do different things but with the same objective. So there's quite a lot of it in common. What's different is that the Labour Party are saying, look, it's been terrible the last few years and we have to change from it, and we have to build more houses, and we have to get control of our streets from lawlessness, and to break down barriers to opportunity, though that's somewhat vague at this stage. Whereas the Conservatives are saying, stick with us, we're the people who know how it worked. We have made mistakes, and they all acknowledge that the very short-lived government of Liz Truss last year was made serious mistakes, but overall, stick with us, we know what we're doing. So those are the two main parties, but it would be worth actually just us talking briefly about the other parties, some of the other parties in this, because they're going to have a big impact And if I may, from the right, the populist right, there is a new party called Reform, and they have taken a big chunk out of the Conservative vote in opinion polls, but and they do present a threat, but they were rather hoping that Nigel Farage would become more than just a figurehead in the party, but a very active player. He announced yesterday that he was going to give his services to America and come and help the Trump campaign. So that possibly reduces the impact that they can have. A second party to mention is the Liberal Democrats, a centrist party, and although they've not got a very high profile, they're doing really well regionally in the south and west, and they're another threat to the Conservatives. They can take seats away from the Conservatives. And the third one to mention is the Scottish National Party, who have been dominant in Scotland now since 2007, and they are doing pretty poorly. There's dissatisfaction with them. They've run into quite a few difficulties, and Labour are hoping to win back Scotland to get back a lot of seats. And I should also mention that all those three have go in favour of Labour and pose problems for the Conservatives. One more to mention, the Green Party. They're becoming quite a strong vehicle for dissident Labour supporters who are fed up with the party's policy on Gaza. I don't think the party has taken a strong enough line against Israel, and by way of protest have switched their allegiance away from Labour and towards the Greens, who they see as a better vehicle for a pro-Palestinian vote. So there's a lot going on. It's quite complicated. Besides the big picture of the two main parties, one of whom will provide the next prime minister.
We're talking with Peter Knowles, C-SPAN's producer in London. Conservatives have been in power for a decade and a half. How significant is that when it comes to this election?
Very significant. I think they're worried that people have, in their own words, stopped listening. Just stop listening to them. They're not interested anymore in what they've got to say. People are conscious that a lot of things have been, very difficult, some within a party's control and some completely out with the Ukraine war, COVID. But there's a sense that they've been around too long, and the current problems that people face in this country are down to them and have stopped listening to them. And what they particularly have as a problem is some bad images. The image of the parties that were held in Downing Street during the COVID lockdowns. The taint of that has not gone away. People haven't forgiven or forgotten that simple thing. The utter chaos around the few weeks of Liz Truss in charge and the damage that did to the economy in just a short space of time, that's not been forgotten either. So that's the problem that they face, and it's why their members of parliament were so shocked that the election campaign had been brought on early, because what they were hoping was going to happen was that they could wait it out till October, November, and that maybe things would turn around, maybe something would come up and Labour would run into difficulties. But no, they've gone for it. It's a brave decision, but as we both know in newsroom speak, brave decisions aren't always being applauded as the right decision. They may just be brave and not have a good outcome. And of course, the launch on Wednesday was actually something of a fiasco. By the time it was announced in the day, people knew what was coming, but had only found out in it an hour or so before. But the Prime Minister had been to the King. He launched himself out into the street to the waiting crowds of reporters and cameras, and it started to rain, and it rained very heavily. But because politicians like to do this kind of thing, he wanted to show that he was didn't need an umbrella, he would just, stick it out. And of course, he ended up looking like a drowned rat. It was a very poor visual image, and he was drowned out audibly by a protester at the end of the street who was trolling him by playing the music from New Labour's theme tune from way back from 1997, Things Can Only Get Better. And the overall impression of the launch was that it was it's quite a mess, actually. And the other mess that's happened in the last 24 hours is that the government has lost some of its key legislation because this has been done in such a rush, and that Parliament has been prorogued, the technical term, today. It was only possible to get through a few pieces of legislation before the shutters came down. And so quite a lot that was regarded as signature legislation has been lost in the rush to go to the polls. So it's been an awkward start to the campaign for the Conservatives. It looks like we're going to have TV debates. In principle, both sides have agreed to, but there's an awful lot of detail to work out. But I would like to just remind our audience that the way this works is quite conventional and quite old-fashioned in terms of a campaign. It's people going out at events around the country, a lot, and absolutely zero TV advertising. You're not allowed to buy TV advertising for politics, as a result of which the spending limit that's imposed on the parties is, it's £34 million, which is $43 million, across the whole country for the entire campaign. That's a campaign for 650 seats. So it's a fraction of the spending in some places. And that's made possible because you can't buy TV advertising. Of course, you can buy online advertising, so that's where a lot of the money will go. But it's not a lot of money compared with some places.
Peter Knowles, C-SPAN's producer in London. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
On Wall Street, the Dow up 4, S&P up 36, and NASDAQ up 184. Finally, in case you missed it this week, on Wednesday, Congresswoman Rosa DeLauro, Democrat from Connecticut, gathered more than 100 pizza makers from Connecticut, plus community leaders and local lawmakers, on the steps of the U.S. Capitol to declare New Haven, Connecticut, the pizza capital of the United States. She also spoke that day on the House floor.
I rise today to recognize a specially crafted food that draws people from across the country to my hometown of New Haven, Connecticut. It is called abits, after the original way la pizza was pronounced in southern Italy. For more than a century, New Haven has been home to some of the most famous pizzerias in the country, known for everything from a plain sauce to white clam to mashed potato. And I proudly rise today to claim New Haven as the pizza capital of the United States. While there are other states that have their own pizza traditions, Connecticut has the most pizzerias of any state per capita and the most family-owned pizzerias of any state in the country. There is something special about New Haven abits. Some say it is coal fire, some say brick ovens, some say it is char, some say it is the water used to make the dough. Personally, I believe it is the generation after generation of dedication to the craft. Historic pizzerias in New Haven area that continue this legacy include Frank Pepe, Pizzeria Napolitana, Modern Abizza, Zupardi's Abizza, Sally's Abizza, Ernie's Abizza, Yorkside Bar, Grand Abizza, and Zanelli and Abate Pizza, just to name a few.
Congresswoman Rosa DeLauro, Democrat from Connecticut, on Wednesday on the House floor. An article in thehill.com has this paragraph: lawmakers representing New York, the Chicago area, and districts near Detroit took aim at DeLauro's declaration, fiercely proclaiming that their pizza hotspots reign supreme in the long-running debate over who has the best place for a cheese pie. You can read more about this at thehill.com. Thanks for listening to Washington Today. Subscribe to C-SPAN's free evening newsletter word for word, and you'll get the stories making headlines in Washington sent to your inbox every day. Sign up at cspan.org/connect. Have a good night, weekend, and holiday. Washington Today will return after Memorial Day on Tuesday.